The latest on Hurricane Irma. All times local 11:20 p.m. The National Hurricane Center in Miami has issued hurricane warnings for South Florida and the Keys. Forecasters on Thursday night issued a warning for a sizable segment of Florida, including the Miami metro area and Lake Okeechobee, as Category 5 Hurricane Irma tracks toward the state with 165 miles per hour, 270 kilometers per hour winds. A storm surge has also been issued for the same area. Irma was 585 miles 940 kilometers east-southeast of Miami late Thursday. The Hurricane Center predicts severe conditions to begin Saturday in Florida, 10:45 p.m. Florida State canceled its home football game Saturday against Louisiana Monroe because of impending Hurricane Irma. The cancellation Thursday night came after Florida Gov. Rick Scott ordered all state colleges and universities closed through Monday to support shelter and emergency relief efforts. The teams do not have open dates on the same week, preventing them from rescheduling the game. Officials on Wednesday initially moved the start time for the game in Tallahassee from 7:30 p.m. to noon, 10:40 p.m. The U.S. Consulate General in Curaçao says it believes about 6,000 Americans are stranded on St. Martin after Hurricane Irma leveled the Caribbean island. The consulate is collecting the names and locations of the stranded and says it is working with the U.S. and other governments to try to figure out how to get the Americans off the island either by air or boat. Frantic Americans were calling relatives in the U.S. to try to get them off the island, especially because Hurricane Jose threatened a second blow to the tourist Mecca. The island is split between French and Dutch control. French Prime Minister Edouard Philippe said 4 people were confirmed dead and 50 injured on the French side of the island. The toll could rise because rescue teams had yet to get a complete look at the damage. 9:05 p.m. Florida Gov. Rick Scott is ordering the closing of all schools, colleges and universities throughout the state. Scott announced late Thursday that all schools as well as state offices would be closed Friday through next Monday. Many school districts and universities had already voluntarily agreed to close due to the looming arrival of Hurricane Irma over the weekend. But many school districts and colleges in North Central and Northwest Florida had remained open. But in a brief statement, Scott said he ordered all schools to shut down so that the buildings could be used potentially as shelters or as staging grounds for relief efforts. He said Floridians facing a life-threatening storm and every family must prepare to evacuate. 8:55 p.m. Florida officials want residents to evacuate the area directly south of Lake Okeechobee as Hurricane Irma approaches. Gov. Rick Scott released a statement Thursday ordering an immediate voluntary evacuation for cities surrounding the southern half of the lake from Lakeport to Canal Point in Hendry, Palm Beach and Glades counties. Mandatory evacuations will be put in place beginning Friday morning. The statement said Scott made the decision after discussing the Herbert Hoover Dike with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Call. Jason Kirk told Scott the structural integrity of the dike would not be compromised, but excessive could wind push some water over the dike. 8:15 p.m. The 5 living former U.S. presidents are creating the One America appeal to raise money for storm recovery as Texas and Louisiana regroup from Harvey and Florida braces for Hurricane Irma. The hurricane recovery effort was announced Thursday by former presidents Barack Obama, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George H. W. Bush and Jimmy Carter. Organizers say a special restricted account has been established through the George H. W. Bush Presidential Library Foundation to collect and quickly distribute donations. Officials say 100 cents out of every dollar donated will help hurricane victims. Donations designated to help victims of Harvey will be distributed to the Houston Harvey Relief Fund and the Rebuild Texas Fund. The appeal is expected to be expanded to help Irma victims. Online donations can be made at oneamericaappeal.org. 8 p.m. The U.S. National Hurricane Center says Hurricane Irma is pummeling the Turks and Caicos Islands. Forecasters say the Category 5 hurricane has top sustained winds of 175 miles per hour, 280 kilometers per hour and is expected to remain powerful for the next couple of days. Irma is centered about 55 miles 85 kilometers west-southwest of Grand Turk Island and is moving west-northwest at 16 miles per hour, 26 kilometers per hour. In the Atlantic, Category 3 Hurricane Jose is moving toward the northern Leeward Islands. Jose has maximum sustained winds of 120 miles per hour, 195 kilometers per hour and is moving west-northwest at 18 miles per hour, 30 kilometers per hour. The storm is about 540 miles 870 kilometers east of the Lesser Antilles. Air Force Hurricane Hunter aircraft are on the way to investigate Hurricane Katia in the Gulf of Mexico. Katia is stationary about 190 miles 310 kilometers north-northeast of Veracruz, Mexico, and forecasters DID&T expect much movement overnight. It has top winds of 80 miles per hour 130 kilometers per hour, 5:40 p.m. The three major amusement parks in Orlando, Florida, are all operating under normal conditions as Hurricane Irma threatens the entire state. Walt Disney World, Universal Orlando and SeaWorld said Thursday morning they are monitoring the movement of Irma, but at this point have made no plans to shut down their parks or alter the normal hours of operations. The storm is projected to reach the southern part of the state Saturday, and some tracking models have the Category 5 hurricane reaching Central Florida on Monday. Each park has refund or rescheduling policies in place for park visitors who may not feel comfortable visiting Orlando this weekend. The parks have their individual policies posted on their respective websites, 5:30 p.m. The U.S. National Hurricane Center says Irma was centered at 5 p.m. EDT Thursday about 40 miles 65 kilometers south of Grand Turk Island and had top sustained winds of 175 miles per hour 280 kilometers per hour. It says the extremely dangerous Category 5 hurricane is moving west-northwest at 16 miles per hour 26 kilometers per hour. In the Atlantic, Hurricane Jose has become the third major hurricane of this year's Atlantic season. Jose now has top sustained winds of 120 miles per hour 195 kilometers per hour. At 5 p.m. EDT, it was moving west-northwest at 18 miles per hour 30 kilometers per hour and was about 660 miles 1,060 kilometers east of the Lesser Antilles. In the Gulf of Mexico, Hurricane Katia was beginning to move Thursday afternoon toward the coast of Mexico. Forecasters say the Category 1 hurricane, with maximum sustained winds of 80 miles per hour 130 kilometers per hour, could be near major hurricane strength at landfall, 5:20 p.m. The U.S. National Hurricane Center says Irma was centered at 5 p.m. EDT Thursday about 40 miles 65 kilometers south of Grand Turk Island and had top sustained winds of 175 miles per hour 280 kilometers per hour. It says the extremely dangerous Category 5 hurricane is moving west-northwest at 16 miles per hour 26 kilometers per hour. The Miami-based center says the Cuban government has now issued a hurricane warning for 4 provinces, including the Cuban Keys along the island nation's north shore. That is in addition to hurricane warnings and watches previously issued elsewhere in the region. It says, the distinct eye of Irma should keep moving between Hispaniola and the Turks and Caicos Islands on Thursday evening in the Gulf of Mexico. Hurricane Katia was beginning to move Thursday afternoon toward the coast of Mexico after being nearly stationary for hours some 215 miles 345 kilometers east of Tampico, Mexico. Forecasters say the Category 1 hurricane, with maximum sustained winds of 80 miles per hour 130 kilometers per hour, could be near major hurricane strength at landfall. The forecast calls for a turn southwestward nearing the coast late Friday or early Saturday. In the Atlantic, Hurricane Jose has become the third major hurricane of this year's Atlantic season. Jose now has top sustained winds of 120 miles per hour 195 kilometers per hour. At 5 p.m. EDT, it was moving west-northwest at 18 miles per hour 30 kilometers per hour and was about 660 miles 1,060 kilometers east of the Lesser Antilles, 5:15 p.m. Authorities in the U.S. Virgin Islands say 3 people have died after Irma caused what they described as catastrophic damage. Governor spokesman Samuel Topp said Thursday that the deaths occurred in the St. Thomas and St. John district. Officials say crews are clearing many roads that remain inaccessible. Irma also killed 4 people and injured about 50 on the French side of St. Martin, an island split between Dutch and French control. 3 more deaths were reported on the British island of Anguilla, Independent Barbuda and the Dutch side of St. Martin. The Category 5 storm destroyed homes, schools, and roads as it roared through the northeast Caribbean this week and heads toward Florida, 4:40 p.m. The star-studded September 12th telethon scheduled to help victims of Hurricane Harvey is expanding its reach to include those affected by Hurricane Irma as well. Event organizers say that they are prepared to help in any way they can. Beyoncé, Blake Shelton, Barbra Streisand and Oprah Winfrey will headline the 1-hour telethon that will be simulcast next week on ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox and CMT. The event will be telecast live at 8 p.m. Eastern on September 12th, and on tape delay at 8 p.m. on the West Coast, and streamed live on Facebook, YouTube and Twitter, 4:10 p.m. Hurricane Irma's top sustained winds weakened by about 10 miles per hour, 16 kilometers per hour on Thursday because of a bit of dry air and interaction with land on the island of Hispaniola, but it is still a top-of-the-scale hurricane. And according to meteorologist Jeff Masters with Weather Underground, Irma could intensify back up to 185 miles per hour, 298 kilometers per hour or even higher because it is headed to warmer, deeper water over the Florida Straits. Although the Hurricane Center forecasts some more weakening because of upper-level winds that could arrive and fight the storm, Masters says those winds might develop too late on Sunday, after Irma has already turned north to Florida. 4 p.m. Maj. Jeremy Dehart has some advice for Floridians after flying through Hurricane Harvey last month and now through the eye of Irma at 10,000 feet on Wednesday. The U.S. Air Force Reserve weather officer says to take it seriously, because this is the real deal. Dehart has flown into about 20 hurricanes, and he says he's never gone into anything quite so powerful or beautiful. Inside Irma's calm, cool center, there's a stadium effect, with thunderstorms flashing on the surrounding eye wall. He calls it spectacular, and says the satellite images can't do it justice. 3:45 p.m. The fate of Florida depends on when and how Hurricane Irma makes a right turn. National Weather Service Director Louis Uccellini says forecasters have no doubt it will turn in the days ahead. If it's an early, sharp turn, Irma is more likely to keep closer to the peninsula's eastern shore or even over water as it churns north. But if it turns later and more widely, the center of Irma and its maximum destructive capacity would move inland. Jeff Masters, the meteorology director of Weather Underground, says the main factor determining the turn will most likely be a low-pressure system expected to develop over the Great Lakes as part of a dip in the jet stream, with some extra help from winds flowing out of the newly formed Hurricane Katia. 3:35 p.m. South Florida officials are expanding evacuation orders as Hurricane Irma approaches, telling more than 500,000 people to seek safety inland. Miami-Dade Mayor Carlos Jimenez has announced evacuation orders for downtown Miami and other parts of the city, plus southern parts of the county. The expanded evacuation area also includes Homestead, Coral Gables, South Miami, Miami Shores and North Miami Beach. County officials had already ordered evacuations Wednesday for Miami Beach and the other barrier islands. The total population for the affected communities is nearly 700,000 people, though the evacuation zones don't always include entire cities. Miami-Dade County's population is about 2.7 million. 3:20 p.m. Florida Gov. Rick Scott has a stark warning for anyone who wants to defy a mandatory evacuation order ahead of Hurricane Irma. He says if you live in any evacuation zones and you're still at home, leave. Scott said he cannot stress this enough. Do not ignore evacuation orders. You rebuild your home, you cannot recreate your family. And do not try to ride out this storm, he says. The time to leave is now, because he says we can't save you once the storm hits. 3 p.m. The eye of Hurricane Irma is moving west-northwest off the Dominican Republic's northern coast as an extremely dangerous Category 5 storm. The U.S. National Hurricane Center said Irma has top sustained winds near 175 miles per hour, 280 kilometers per hour, and is expected to continue moving between Hispaniola and the Turks and Caicos in the afternoon hours, on a course taking it to the southeastern Bahamas Thursday evening. As of 2 p.m. EDT, Irma's crisply defined eye was about 65 miles 105 kilometers north-northeast of Puerto Plata, Dominican Republic, moving at about 16 miles per hour 25 kilometers per hour to the west-northwest. In the Atlantic, Hurricane Jose has rapidly strengthened to a Category 2 hurricane with top sustained winds of 105 miles per hour 165 kilometers per hour. Jose is following Irma's path, moving west-northwest at 18 miles per hour 30 kilometers per hour over open ocean, about 660 miles 1,060 kilometers east of the Lesser Antilles. In the Gulf of Mexico, Hurricane Katia was virtually stationary Thursday afternoon, some 215 miles 345 kilometers east of Tampico, Mexico. Forecasters say that Category 1 hurricane, with maximum sustained winds of 80 miles per hour 130 kilometers per hour, should remain stationary through late Thursday, then approach the Mexican coast late Friday or early Saturday. 2:40 p.m. A second Dutch Navy ship has arrived at the shattered island of St. Martin and is ready to deliver aid to the population in need. The Dutch Navy just tweeted that the Pelican ship has moored at the island's capital of Philipsburg to unload vital supplies. Another Navy vessel, the Zealand, already is in the area and has been using an onboard helicopter to assess damage inflicted by Hurricane Irma. Two military aircraft are being loaded in the Netherlands before flying to the island of Curaçao, from where they will fly onward to St. Martin to deliver 5 days of food and water for the 40,000 population. The aircraft also are bringing 100 more troops to deliver aid, repair infrastructure and restore order. 2:05 p.m. Evacuation orders are multiplying across Florida as local officials try to get the most vulnerable populations to move to safety ahead of Hurricane Irma. Miami-Dade has now made evacuations mandatory for all of its coastal areas, barrier islands and mobile homes. Monroe County's mandatory order stands for the entire Florida Keys. Broward County's order remains voluntary for mobile homes and low-lying areas. Collier County issued a voluntary evacuation order for Marco Island. County authorities across South Florida are making school buses available for people with special needs to get out. Additional evacuations are expected throughout the state. 2:10 p.m. The U.S. National Hurricane Center says Hurricane Jose has grown into a Category 2 storm, and it threatened some of the same islands ravaged just days ago by Hurricane Irma. Jose was about 660 miles 1,060 kilometers east of the Lesser Antilles early Thursday afternoon, with maximum sustained winds of 105 miles per hour 165 kilometers per hour. It was heading to the west-northwest at 18 miles per hour 20 kilometers per hour. The Hurricane Center says a hurricane watch is in effect for Antigua and Barbuda, which is already trying to recover from Category 5 Irma. Now Jose could approach those islands on Saturday. 2:05 p.m. The Dutch Interior Minister says one person is confirmed dead on the former colony of St. Martin as a result of Category 5 Hurricane Irma. Interior Minister Ronald Plasterk said Thursday that there are also a number of injuries, and that the Dutch authorities still only have an incomplete picture of the damage on St. Martin, which is home to some 40,000 people and suffered severe damage as Irma barreled over on Wednesday. Plasterk also says there have been some public order problems, including instances of looting. He says the Netherlands is sending an extra 50 police from Curaçao. 1:55 p.m. North Carolina Gov. Roy Cooper issued a statewide emergency declaration Thursday and told people to be prepared statewide, even though projections suggest the storm could be much weaker by next week. Cooper says tropical storms can be very dangerous, and this storm can impact any part of North Carolina, all over our state from the mountains to the coast. Nick Petro with the National Weather Service in Raleigh said heavy rain and inland wind damage could result in extended power outages and mountain mudslides, as well as dangerous coastal surf. More than 300 National Guard soldiers are being brought in to help, with more on standby. All highway work and lane closures are being suspended to help evacuations from other states. 1:50 p.m. Billionaire entrepreneur Richard Branson says he and his staff rode out Hurricane Irma on his private Caribbean island without suffering injuries, but the area is heavily damaged. The head of the Virgin Group owns Small Necker Island in the British Virgin Islands. He said in a blog entry Thursday that he and the staff who stayed with him in a concrete cellar on the island are safe and well. Branson said the area surrounding his home is completely and utterly devastated. He said entire houses have disappeared and I have never seen anything like this hurricane. Outside the cellar, he said bathroom and bedroom doors and windows were blown out. He said he was communicating via satellite phone, but all other communications were down. 1:45 p.m. Haiti's Interior Minister has ordered the evacuation of coastal areas in the north of the country. That includes people living in and around Port-de-Paix and the island known as Île de la Tortue. Haiti is expected to be spared a direct hit from Hurricane Irma, but heavy rains and high of surf could trigger dangerous floods in the impoverished country. Interior Minister Max Rudolph Saint-Albin is urging people to move to higher ground. Shelters have been set up. The Civil Protection Agency. The evacuation is mandatory, but Haiti does not have enough police or other officials to enforce evacuation orders, and the number of people who left vulnerable areas is not known. 1:35 p.m. The Cuban Civil Defense Agency is preparing people on the northern coast of Cuba's eastern provinces for a sideswipe from Hurricane Irma in the hours ahead. Santiago Province has opened 125 evacuation centers that can hold 38,000 people. Another 20,000 people can take refuge with neighbors and family in safer zones. Civil Defense Representative Odessa Fuentes said the centers will be open for the duration of the storm's passage on Friday. 1:30 p.m. President Donald Trump says we are with the people of Florida as Hurricane Irma draws near. Speaking in the Oval Office on Thursday, Trump says his administration is very concerned as the record hurricane approaches the U.S. mainland, but he says we think we're as well prepared as you can possibly be. The president says he hopes the storm won't hit Florida directly. He says, "We are with the people of Florida." 1:10 p.m. As NASA secured Kennedy Space Center on Thursday for potentially catastrophic wind and rain, the private SpaceX company squeezed out a rocket launch. Kennedy is closing its doors to all non-essential staff, effective Friday. Of 9,000 workers, a hurricane crew of 120 people will ride out Irma on site. Most critical buildings can withstand gusts up to about 135 miles per hour, 217 kilometers per hour, but Irma's winds could well exceed that if the storm's center reaches Cape Canaveral. Space Center workers rushed to stack sandbags at doorways and cover the Orion capsule scheduled to launch in 2 years on a brand-new NASA rocket. Meanwhile, SpaceX managed to launch an unmanned Falcon rocket carrying an Air Force mini-shuttle bound for a long experimental flight in orbit. 1 p.m. Georgia's governor has ordered a mandatory evacuation starting on Saturday from the state's Atlantic coast ahead of Hurricane Irma. That includes the city of Savannah. Gov. Nathan Deal issued the evacuation Thursday for all areas east of Interstate 95, all of Chatham County and some areas west of the interstate. He also expanded a state of emergency to 30 counties. Deal's order authorizes about 5,000 Georgia National Guard members to be on active duty to help people respond and recover. Georgia hasn't been hit by a hurricane with winds Category 3 or higher since 1898. South Carolina Gov. Henry McMaster also declared a state of emergency. A major strike there would be the first in nearly 28 years. 12:50 p.m. U.S. Virgin Islands Gov. Kenneth Mapp says they're getting badly needed federal help after Hurricane Irma significantly damaged St. Thomas and St. John with top winds of 150 miles per hour for more than 4 hours. Fire and police stations collapsed and the main hospital in St. Thomas sustained heavy damage. Mapp told the Associated Press Thursday authorities are distributing emergency food and water, tarps and other supplies, and evacuating hospital patients to Puerto Rico and elsewhere. A curfew remains in effect, including about 5,000 tourists. And the governor is knocking down false reports that the government is confiscating firearms. He says that's a misunderstanding of standard language used to activate the National Guard. He says he's got hospitals breached, homes with roofs gone and police and fire stations that are blown away. He's not interested in anybody's firearms. 12:40 p.m. There have been very few cyclones stronger than Hurricane Irma. And there have been some that lasted longer. But no other storm in recorded history has maintained top winds of 185 miles per hour for 37 hours. Colorado State University hurricane expert Phil Klotzbach says that breaks the previous record, held by Typhoon Haiyan, which had similar top winds for 24 hours before it hit the Philippines and killed 6,000 people in 2013. Irma also has been the most intense Atlantic hurricane on record outside the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico, measured by its barometric pressure of 914 millibars. 12:30 p.m. Gov. Rick Scott is urging all gas stations in Florida to stay open as long as possible to accommodate evacuees. Scott even announced at his midday Thursday news conference that police escorts will get gas station employees out safely and if necessary just ahead of Hurricane Irma. He says authorities are already escorting fuel tankers through traffic and to gas stations as quickly as possible. Scott says all of the state's ports are still operating, bringing in fuel and supplies. He urged residents to take only as much gas as they need to make sure there is enough for everyone who needs it. 12:15 p.m. French Prime Minister Edouard Philippe says 4 people are confirmed dead and about 50 injured on the Caribbean island of St. Martin in the wake of Hurricane Irma. The Prime Minister said 1 person faces life-threatening injuries and 2 others were in serious condition. The death toll was lower than one given earlier Thursday by France's Interior Minister, who said 8 people had been killed on French Caribbean territories. Philippe said 4 bodies have been found on St. Martin and are being identified. The island is part French, part Dutch, and Dutch authorities have not reported any casualties. An official in Philippe's office said only 4 people are currently confirmed dead so far after a re-evaluation of the damage Wednesday. The official said the toll could rise as rescuers reach the scene. Philippe says large amounts of aid and equipment are en route to St. Martin and nearby St. Bart's. 11:55 a.m. French President Emmanuel Macron says he will visit French territories damaged by Hurricane Irma as soon as the weather allows. Speaking in Athens Thursday, Macron said he decided not to call off his 2-day visit to Greece because prevailing weather conditions would have prevented a flight to the French territories, and an emergency government meeting in Paris was concluded before he left. Irma, the strongest Atlantic Ocean hurricane on record, has affected French, British and Dutch Caribbean territories, 11:45 a.m. Florida Gov. Rick Scott says the state is doing all it can to relieve fuel shortages and traffic jams to keep people evacuating ahead of Hurricane Irma. Scott is acknowledging that empty pumps, long lines and crowded highways are frustrating for Floridians. But he says his administration is working with federal authorities and other states to move as much gas into Florida as they can. This includes having the Florida Highway Patrol escort fuel trucks through any traffic. Florida Highway Safety spokeswoman Beth Frady says troopers escorted trucks from 2 Florida ports to stations in Marion and Martin counties overnight, and also were escorting trucks from Georgia to stations in Perry, in north-central Florida near where Interstate 75 crosses Interstate 10, 11:35 a.m. Britain is sending hundreds of troops and the Royal Navy flagship HMS Ocean to its overseas islands battered by Hurricane Irma. Britain has already sent one ship, RFA Mount Bay, to Anguilla, which took the full force of the storm. Defense Secretary Michael Fallon said Thursday he had ordered HMS Ocean to head to the Caribbean from the Mediterranean. Fallon also said the UK was sending a task group of several hundred troops, Marines, engineers and additional helicopters. British authorities are being criticized for being slow to send aid to territories in the storm's path, but Fallon said we are going to make sure the islands get the help they need. Irma has hit the British territories Anguilla, Montserrat, the British Virgin Islands and Turks and Caicos, 11:30 a.m. Dutch airline KLM has cancelled 2 flights to the hurricane-shattered island of St. Martin as authorities struggle to assess the extent of the devastation to many buildings, including the airport. KLM said in a statement Thursday it has cancelled flights scheduled to leave the Netherlands on Friday and Sunday for St. Martin in the aftermath of Category 5 Hurricane Irma's direct hit on the island on Wednesday. The carrier says it is keeping a close eye on the situation and, based on the circumstances, will decide whether operations can be resumed. The airline says it is in contact with the Dutch government and local authorities to seek a solution for passengers stranded amid the devastation, 11:20 a.m. Hurricane Irma is flooding parts of the Dominican Republic as it roars by just off the northern coast of the island it shares with Haiti. Officials said about 500 tourists in the Bavara Punta Cana area were moved to more secure shelters just ahead of the Category 5 storm. Civil Defense Director Rafael Carrasco says a landslide in the Somana Peninsula affected 8 houses and more than 2,500 people have been evacuated. Punta Cana Airport has reopened after being closed for several hours. Haiti's northern coast will be next, but Irma's stronger winds have yet to reach that side of the island of Hispaniola, 11 a.m. The hurricane watch is now in effect for the Florida Keys and parts of South Florida. The U.S. Hurricane Center in Miami says a watch has been issued for the Florida Keys, and on the South Florida mainland from Jupiter Inlet southward and around the peninsula to Bonita Beach. The center noted that Hurricane Irma was still an extremely dangerous Category 5 hurricane, although its winds had decreased slightly from 180 miles per hour 285 kilometers per hour to 175 miles per hour 280 kilometers per hour. The hurricane was headed for the Turks and Caicos Islands on Thursday. The Hurricane Center has predicted that Irma will remain at Category 4 or 5 for the next day or two as it passes the Turks and Caicos, parts of the Bahamas by Thursday night, and skirts Cuba on Friday night into Saturday. It will then likely head north toward Florida, where people were rushing to board up homes, fill cars with gasoline and find a route to safety, 10 a.m. More than 1 million people in Puerto Rico are without power, nearly 70% of customers of Puerto Rico's Electric Power Authority. Puerto Rican Gov. Ricardo Rossello said Thursday that crews are investigating and until they know the extent of the damage, it will be difficult to estimate how long the power outage will last. Rossello added that ports on the island are still closed, and it's unclear when commercial flights will resume. Schools and government offices are scheduled to reopen on Monday, 9 a.m. Airports in the Bahamas are shutting down with the approach of Hurricane Irma. The government says the international airport in Nassau will close late Thursday, and it urges people who plan to leave the island chain east of Florida to check with airlines for space. Grand Bahamas Airport and the less populated island throughout the chain will close by noon Friday. Hurricane Irma has cut a path of devastation across the northern Caribbean, leaving at least 10 dead and thousands homeless. The storm could also make a catastrophic strike on Florida. The U.S. National Hurricane Center predicted Irma would remain at Category 4 or 5 for the next day or two as it passes just to the north of the Dominican Republic and Haiti on Thursday, nears the Turks, Caicos and parts of the Bahamas by Thursday night, and skirts Cuba on Friday night into Saturday. It will then likely head north toward Florida, where people were rushing to board up homes, fill cars with gasoline and find a route to safety. 9 a.m. President Donald Trump is urging people to be careful, be safe during Hurricane Irma. In a tweet Thursday morning, Trump remarked that Irma is raging, but we have great teams of talented and brave people already in place and ready to help. Trump asked people to be careful, be safe. Hurricane Irma has cut a path of devastation across the northern Caribbean, leaving at least 10 dead and thousands homeless. The storm could also make a catastrophic strike on Florida. Trump said Wednesday that the storm looks like it could be something that could be not good. Believe me, not good. 8:15 a.m. French President Emmanuel Macron says France is grief-stricken by the devastation caused by Hurricane Irma, and he's calling for concerted efforts to tackle global warming and climate change to prevent similar future natural disasters. Speaking Thursday during a visit to Greece, Macron said the planet's situation must be stabilized and that leaders must take steps to combat global warming so we can avoid such natural disasters in the future. French Interior Minister Gerard Collomb told Frank Info that at least 8 people died and another 23 were injured when the monstrous Category 5 storm walloped the French Caribbean island territories of Saint Martin and Saint Barthélemy. That number is expected to rise. 7:50 a.m. The Florida Highway Patrol says troopers are monitoring the high volume of traffic heading north on Florida's Turnpike as people evacuate South Florida. In a news release Thursday, the Highway Patrol said extra troopers, road rangers and wreckers will be on the roadways to help drivers whose vehicles have become disabled. The agency says disabled vehicles left on the shoulders of the highways would be towed starting Thursday morning to make it easier for emergency workers who are trying to reach crash victims. Turnpike officials are also using cameras along the road to monitor conditions. 6:50 a.m. The UK government says Hurricane Irma has inflicted severe and in places critical damage to the British overseas territory of Anguilla. Foreign Office Minister Alan Duncan says the Caribbean island took the full force of the Category 5 hurricane. He told lawmakers on Thursday that the British Virgin Islands have also suffered severe damage. On another British territory, Montserrat, the damage is not as severe as first thought. Duncan said the hurricane is expected to hit another British overseas territory, Turks and Caicos, later Thursday. Britain has dispatched a Royal Navy ship carrying Marines and Army engineers to the affected islands. Duncan says there are unconfirmed reports of a number of fatalities as a result of the hurricane. 6:45 a.m. The Dutch Prime Minister says Category 5 Hurricane Irma was a storm of epic proportions when it slammed into the former Dutch colony of Saint Martin in the Caribbean and is appealing to Dutch citizens to donate to a relief fund set up by the Red Cross. Speaking Thursday after a meeting of the government's crisis committee, Prime Minister Mark Rutte said there are no reports yet of casualties on the Dutch side of the island. Rutte says the damage is huge, particularly on Saint Martin, with wide-scale destruction of infrastructure, houses and businesses. He says, there is no power, no gasoline, no running water. Houses are underwater, cars are floating through the streets, inhabitants are sitting in the dark, in ruined houses and are cut off from the outside world. The Dutch military is readying 2 aircraft to fly to the region to distribute vital aid to the shattered territory, which is home to some 40,000 people. However, the airport on the Dutch side of the island is badly damaged.